most likely case is this video comes out after the discussion. So with that video being uploaded, that means I have been reading Classroom of the Elite, and I'm going to be talking about more and covering more Classroom of the Elite on the channel. And if you haven't checked out that video already, if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the first 7 volumes along with some other people's thoughts on the first 7 volumes, I definitely recommend checking out. But we did break down the goods and the bads and the uglies, I guess you could say, of Classroom of the Elite. But after reading all those volumes, I finally have landed at volume 8. Having just finished the volume, I wanted to give my thoughts / review on the entirety of volume 8. However, though, fair warning, this video is sort of unplanned, so I didn't take any notes, and therefore there will be some information and parts that happen during this volume that I have forgotten and will not cover, so bear with me with that. But for the most part, I will talk about everything that stood out to me that I remember, the good, the bad, and the Kowenji. With all that being said, let's begin the discussion. The story first starts off with the soliloquy of Horikita Manabu, a very unexpected soliloquy, but an interesting one with the use of hindsight. At first, I didn't think much of this monologue with Manabu because I'm not the biggest fan, but I was happy that we were going to get more attention focused on Manabu. I pleasantly enjoyed the soliloquy because I like the fact that Manabu is a nonchalant guy with a very stoic, righteous, and lawful mindset. Sort of reminded me of like a older Katsuragi. However, that is all I have to say in terms of the soliloquy. There isn't really much I have on my own particular thoughts on that. Let's just move on to the overall parts of the volume that I felt stuck out to me. Within the first chapter, the first thing I want to say is the amount of joy and happiness it brought to my heart to hear the first year's class 1D being promoted to first year 1C. It is the first monumental step on a large staircase to the top of class A, and looking back at all volumes 1 through 7 and seeing the progress, ups and downs, along with the development of not only individual characters themselves like Kei, Sudo, and Horikita, but the cohesion of the class as a whole. It's so satisfying to see the hard work they put in to get where they are now at class C. So it put a real big smile on my face. As for my thoughts on the special exam itself, along with its rules, I didn't think much of it. I typically half-heartedly pay attention to the rules of the exam just because I believe in Classroom of the Elite so much that I don't think it will break its system. The rules are sometimes a little complicated. That would take me a few rereads to get the hang of it, and I don't see the point because, as I said, I don't think that Classroom Elite is going to break its own system. So I have faith to not just reread them. At least I try to get a minor understanding of what's going on. But usually I care more about the psychological gains that come from the exam. And if something feels off, I would go back and reread the rules to see if everything lines up. At the beginning of the exam, I'm truly happy that Yukimura was given the role of leader. With that establishment of the Ayana Koji group, I like Yukimura a bit more than my initial take on him back in volume 4. However, this volume has made me like Yukimura a lot more. Putting Yukimura in the position of power allows for him to shed his thick skin of the shy and pretentious nerd that he is and become a lot more open and courageous, and also a motivational leader to help the people around him. Seeing that journey throughout the volume was exactly what I wanted from Yukimura. Starting off not necessarily wanting the role of leader, but ultimately being indifferent or neutral. Then because of the actions of a hot-headed Ishizaki along with a prideful Kowenji, he began to resent the essence of authority and his leadership role. However, during one particular scene, which is one of my favorite scenes from this show so far, allowed for Yukimura to become the great and confident leader to lead the group to victory. The specific scene I'm talking about is the bedtime scene when the first year group began to talking to each other in the dark. This is one of the most powerful and slightly beautiful scenes from Classroom Elite. However, even though I love the scene, I do believe it has its problems. First, let me talk about what makes the scene so great. After a long week of hardship and a final explosion of Ishizaki as described by Ayana Koji, the group were at their lowest. Sitting up in a dark room late at night, this sets Hashimoto to go off and explain his backstory. He goes off and tells how he used to be a part of the soccer club during middle school, further explaining how his team used to win many matches and go to the nationals, but a secret that he hid from everyone except his family was that he used to smoke. After a while of being on the team, he began to feel alienated. Everyone had their common goal of working together and trying to be the best soccer team. Meanwhile, he wasn't as passionate about the sport, which allowed his leave of absence to be an easy bridge to cross. However, after being at his current school and seeing the current soccer team, he reminisces over the fond memories and possible futures that he could have had. One thing I always clap for and always give praise to Classroom Elite is for doing a great job in making very compelling and realistic characters. The beauty that I find in Hashimoto's backstory is that he cannot understand the paradox within himself. Assuming with Hashimoto's personality, he was a pretty popular kid. He had many friends, most likely in the soccer team. Nevertheless, with so many friends, he still felt alienated, with one of the catalysts to that alienation is his smoking hobby. Looking at the passion from his other classmates and coming to the realization that he doubt any one of them would risk their soccer career on smoking, he felt as if he needed to leave the team. The smoking habit, along with a forced passion to play the game, he felt like he didn't belong. But when looking at the new students at this new school and seeing them have fun, all he can do and wish and dream of the possible future that he could have had on the field. And having that dream, he cannot understand why he wanted that, considering he believes he is not passionate enough to play soccer anymore to even begin to have those possibilities. So I just love the realism of Hashimoto's character during this point, that after Hashimoto let his feelings go, Yukimura was up next. The greatness of Yukimura's story is that ever since he was a little child, he was thrown into the world of studying. He knew he had no affinity for physical exertion, so he never focused on it because he believed it was only necessary if he was going to become some sort of professional athlete. Having transferred into high school and being put into class 1D, he felt as if he was being mocked or it was a mistake. Explaining his condescending nature, he knew that he could study better than anyone and get better grades than all of them. But even with all that, he didn't make it into class A or class B, C. He made it right to the bottom of the bottom at class D. Now, having been at the school for 3 semesters, he began to realize that I may not be the top of the food chain as I thought I was, to even point out where someone who he looked down upon as an inferior student, aka pseudo, was actually more useful than someone of his caliber. Realizing that no matter what may lie in front of him, whether it be academics or sport, he must try his hardest to not be a liability, especially since he is the leader of the group. Finally admitting this and speaking out loud, this allowed Ishizaki to forgive and understand and accept Yukimura as a leader. Before I quickly go over what I felt was missing from the scene, I felt as if I needed to describe what makes this scene so great and realistic. The crux of the scene is the darkness that covers the room. Allowing the scene to take place in the dark where no one can see anyone. This allows for people to adjust their mental state and look up into the void of darkness to assimilate an echo chamber. Doing this makes a person feel as if they are in a safe space and can speak freely without the fear of being humiliated or ridiculed for their personal feelings, which I found so much personal enjoyment from, because I've been in these situations where the lights are off, and from that point that's when the real conversations start to begin amongst the group, and we all begin to pour out our real feelings and how we feel about each other, the day, our life, and etc, etc. Nonetheless, the scene was great, but could have been done better. The underwhelming part of the entire dark room discussion is the lack of attention to detail, and what I mean by this is that I believe that the scene could have been 10 times, if not 50 times better than what it actually was. Once again, Classroom Elite falls to its lack of explanation that I find happens very rarely in the series, but it does happen quite a bit. If this scene would have had more dialogue and more backstory from Yahiko, Ishizaki, and even Albert, the information that we would have learned from this discussion would have made Ishizaki, Yahiko, Albert into actual characters instead of the brutes who are just bodies for the sake of needing a cast of characters, and that would have been absolutely stupendous. I would have loved it. On top of that, they could have made Ayano Koji talk about his past. However, considering the personality that Ayano Koji is, he most likely would have told a fake past. And I think it would have been a good way for the author to also throw in a bit of realism, whereas he gives a fake backstory, but it has somewhat sort of real elements from his real backstory tied into it. And I think that would have been nice. But getting into the minds of all the characters, along with a little Koenji interaction, would have been the perfect way, I believe, to write this scene. But for what I got, I still loved it, and it's still one of my favorite scenes out of all of Classroom Elite. The next character I want to talk about is the main man, the big bad himself, Miyabi Nagumo. This volume was the volume where I needed Nagumo to impress me, to put on the show. I needed him to demand my attention that I felt the story was forcing onto me. And I can safely say that he did not disappoint. With the setup and attention that Miyabi was getting, I thought that he may not be able to live up to that expectation, especially what I want from him, considering my own personal beliefs on what type of villain he might turn out to be. When he gave his speech back in volume 6, I began to think that Miyabi was some sort of Pariston type character. He has his own goal, but values the enjoyment he gets from crushing people, along with the charisma that he has. That's what I thought the two had in common. At the conclusion of the volume, it confirms that these characters are actually quite similar. With how methodical Miyabi is, made me so happy for him to turn out out, and I feel now that he will be a formidable antagonist to Ayano Koji. But to look at what he has done throughout the volume was very, very interesting and had my attention every step of the way. And I do have to give a round of applause for being the first person to give Koenji his first L. When he exposed Koenji's entire plan in front of everyone's, my mind was absolutely blown, just completely shocked. Not only because he exposed Koenji, but the fact that Koenji had a plan saved up along with us knowing Koenji's ultimate goal. This was the first step of me becoming a real Miyabi stan, because at first I didn't think Koenji, I thought Koenji was just vibing in the classroom. I thought he just didn't really care. He knew he was going to graduate. I didn't think he actually cared about getting to class A. So finding out about this, it was amazing to see. The next thing that I really liked was the card game he had with the first years. As he arrived in the room and offered to play Old Maid, I immediately knew he was up to something. His mischief with rigging the outcome of the games was amazing to watch, and the way that you were able to feel the tension between Miyabi and Ayano Koji as Miyabi tries to get a reaction out of Ayano Koji to stuff him out as the special student that he feels Manabu hypes up, along with Ayano Koji observing Manabu's movement. It was a good display of those two interacting. The next movements of Miyabi or interaction that had my attention was the last night talk he had with Manabu. It was not necessarily Manabu's conversation that had my interest, but it was Miyabi's interaction with Ryuen and Hashimoto that really piqued my interest. The way that Ryuen is down bad and is demotivated, but he still keeps the flair and bashfulness. I wish Miyabi would have took the deal from Ryuen, just because I think it would be funny how Miyabi would be shocked that Ryuen can actually pay that money off. As for Hashimoto, I like his interactions because it's a good way to set up Hashimoto as a character who will be more relevant later on in the series. Because of Miyabi, his attention has now been drawn towards Ayano Koji. While I am on the topic of Hashimoto, he's looking to be one of my favorite characters. The fact that he's willing to betray Sakinagi and believes he's going to get away with it with an agenda that is pretty solid. I like how his only purpose is Class A and will betray anyone to get there and do not care about any of his classmates. All of this makes Hashimoto a character that I am for sure going to be paying more attention to as the series continues. Now back to Miyabi. The last thing to talk about is of course Miyabi winning in the end. Because of the way that Miyabi won, it really gave me those Pariston vibes. As I said, many of you that have seen Hunter x Hunter. He lost the battle between him and Manabu for the boys' sides. However, using the sneaky and conniving tactics, he was able to expel one girl from the other side, and using her as a pawn, she would be able to drag down someone very important to Manabu, who is Tachibana. The plan Miyabi had was a little confusing for me at first because of the details of which I was thinking, what was the point of doing all of this if they're both going to go with no one actually being expelled? But the more I thought about it, and correct me if I'm wrong in my assessment of his plan, but to me it felt like the purpose of his plan was to send a message to Manabu to let him know he is not the same little vice president that he knew. He wanted to let Manabu know that he can be touched, and with that message I thought was a perfect way for the story to make Miyabi be a lot more likable. So throughout the entire volume, Miyabi has been doing everything I needed him to do. Because of that, I would keep a close eye on him from here on out. He is truly looking to be one of my favorite characters. Actually, pretty much is one of my favorite characters, at least in terms of the male cast. Before I talk about the last person that really piqued my interest, let's talk about the professor. It wasn't much for what I got, but I'm very thankful for what I have. I felt that this minor development was something I needed from the professor. He's slowly growing out of his weird basement shell. So the first step in helping him develop is him having to lose the accent, which is great. Also on top of the development, the instructor told the professor that he must change himself to conform to society. However, that does not mean he should lose his own individuality, which is a perfect thing to say to a kid, especially the particular kid that is the professor. With that out of the way, the last male side character to talk about is of course Koenji. This volume is by far the best version of Koenji and the most he has ever talked. The greatest part about Koenji's involvement throughout this volume was his interactions with other students, along with us knowing and understanding what's going on inside of Koenji's mind. I talked about it earlier, but his plan to buy all the class points of the senior students in order to climb to Class A is genius. As for the other interesting and mostly shocking thing Koenji did, which is probably the most shocking reveal in this volume, which is Koenji figuring out that Ayano Koji was the cause for Ryuen stepping down. He doesn't specifically know how it happened, but he doesn't even really care. But the fact that he figured it out when no one else has yet is why I hold Koenji in such a high regard, because I believe this is the biggest feat that anyone can have in the entire series, is of course beating Ayano Koji. But other than the scene, you just have amazing Koenji dialogue and interactions that make me like him even more as a character. Also, there are one specific scene that includes Koenji, but I'm not going to talk about Koenji. But however, the scene I am talking about is the bathroom scene. Right off the bat, true feelings, I hated the scene. I could not stand it. I understand the subtle importance of the scene to build up more character interaction, considering we had people talking and interacting with other students who we don't normally get to talk to. However, this scene was not for me. I get it. It was a gag scene, but I didn't find it funny whatsoever. If it was in the anime version, maybe I would have liked it. Like if they were to release season 3 or season 4, whenever this part would come out, maybe I'll find it a bit more funny. But reading it, I just couldn't laugh. I didn't care about a dick measuring contest. It is probably one of my least favorite scenes from the entire series. But before I wrap this whole thing up, the only 2 complaints I have in this volume is the lack of attention to the girl side of the exam. I like the Ichinose perspective chapter along with Horikita perspective chapter, but my problem was they did nothing but tease a short bit of what was going on Ichinose and Horikita's side. I felt that those chapters should have been at least 30 to 50 pages long, and since they were not, it felt like a missed opportunity to explore their 2 characters even more, along with Kushida, who resided with Horikita, and then Ichinose, who basically from volume 7.5 was expected to get beaten by Sakiyanagi, and seeing a little bit of that was great because as I love Ichinose, but however, I will sacrifice my standing, my love for Ichinose to see her get broken down and beat up by Sakiyanagi, because that's what I need from Sakiyanagi in order for her to be as great as a villain as she thinks she is, and I feel that the story is hyping her up to be. So wish there was more detail and focus onto that moment, but it was still cool to see that. Last complaint is the plot convenient moment for Ayano Koji. The reason I didn't like this part wasn't because of how was because of how I see Classroom of the Elite. I would never expect Classroom of the Elite to do something as, for lack of a better term, as flimsy as this. The scene I'm talking about is when Ayano Koji has said that he knows that girl bracelet before because he had picked it up and gave it to her back then or whenever he did. It was never stated in any previous volume, at least not that I can remember or to my knowledge. And even when I went and looked on the wiki to see when the first time Asahina was introduced into the story, the wiki said volume 8. But that information is contradictory to what is stated in volume 8 because Ayano Koji said he met her doing volume 7.5, in which it was the location when Magumo and his goon squad pulled up on him, and I can't remember if any attention was actually put on her or not, but I do remember that specific scene. But other than that, she has never been ever mentioned or hinted at to my knowledge in the story. So the fact that Classroom Elite pulled this moment or excuse out of nowhere is something I didn't like, considering how intricate the series is being written, especially when it comes to the psychological warfare and mind games that it admits. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. However, my complaints I feel are loud but minor to me. I don't believe my problems with this volume takes away from the overall greatness and enjoyable scenes that I've partaken during it. It is still one of my favorite volumes, just has a few hiccups, but a great volume nonetheless. This is probably a top 3, top 4, it's definitely top 5 volume for me, but it's somewhere around that range. So I loved it, even though I believe it has its own problems. But I think that's it for the overall review. I hope you all have enjoyed this, I guess you could say, discussion slash review slash thoughts on Classroom Elite Volume 8. More Classroom Elite content will be coming out soon. Like the video, comment your thoughts on Volume 8, and hit that subscribe button, of course. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see me live tweet my way through the volumes. So I highly recommend hitting that follow button, and stay tuned for more content. And thank you all for watching.